Hey everybody, it's Johnny P, the Painted Coach. As always, thought I would share my thoughts and some of the conversations that I've had, and I was lucky last week to spend some quality time with a group of people on one of our training workshops, and we got into some really rich conversations, and we got into a conversation on day 2 about our constant well-being and what that actually means. And I started to introduce certain things around universal laws. I'm a big believer on these laws around us that are happening. They affect us all, but a lot of the time we don't actually know they're actually happening, but they're there. So for an example, the law of gravity, the law of electricity, they're all there. They're all universal laws and they all affect us, but a lot of time we just don't think about them. And I talked about one law that's always in effect, and it's something to consider when we look at ourselves and our own personal well-being, be that physically, psychologically, emotionally, our own personal growth. And that is what I call the law of accumulated neglect. Can take a very heavy toll and pay a certain price. So I'd like to talk about that one specifically on this video, the law of accumulated neglect, and especially this one word, neglect. And I take it in the context of what are we neglecting, and over time the accumulation of this neglect will have its price to pay and can sometimes pay a heavy toll. And I used to always say that the accumulated neglect that we don't deal with, then one day maybe a day of reckoning will appear. And I don't want to feel all doom and gloom about this, but I would like you to just consider this. What am I neglecting? But then, okay, so, all right, great. We've got this word neglect, or we've got this law of accumulated neglect. What can I do about it? How do I think about it? So I start then to look at domains. So this is how I work this law when I sit down and write about it. Is I look at the certain domains in my life, and I start to think about what is it that I'm neglecting in these domains, these personal domains. So these domains could be relationships. So it could be your family relationships, it could be your friends, it could be your work colleagues, basically anything that you have a relationship with. What are you neglecting? So are you neglecting a family relationship? Are you neglecting a friend relationship? Have you not been in contact? Are you making up things in your mind where you think you can justify things, and then it will lead into this accumulated neglect, and then one day maybe there might be a day of reckoning. So relationships is one to think about. The relationships about the people around you. Then we've got our physical well-being. So that's what a lot of people look to, is what are you neglecting when it comes down to your physical well-being? That could be your psychological well-being. So again, what are you neglecting there? Are you spending time on your own? Are you understanding about the thoughts in your head and how you can cope with these thoughts or handle these thoughts? It could be about your nutrition, about the food that you're putting into your body. It could be about your career. So what are the things that you're neglecting around your career and your progression? It could be things around personal growth. Are you neglecting your personal growth? I always challenge people and challenge myself. What have I learned recently? Say in the last 30 days, what have I read? What have I watched? How have I progressed myself? How have I changed my viewpoint of the world? How have I got better and stronger? So you've got all these domains. So the way I do it is I sit, I grab my cup of coffee, find some isolation time, and I think this through. What are the things that I'm neglecting in these domains? So pick a domain. What is it you're neglecting? And then what could it accumulate to if you carry on neglecting it? And then what could be the consequence? And I also then started talking about the unintended consequences. There is things that maybe that you're doing now that later on there might be an unintended consequence, but it will happen. So I used to always think about, and I still think about that, what are the unintended consequences if I keep doing what I'm doing? So I've talked about on my videos a lot of the time that I have a tendency to eat sweet food. I eat a lot of chocolate sometimes. I have this thought in my head, I get fused to it, and then I start to eat junk food, or food that's not so good for me. And if I neglect this area of my life, what will it accumulate to? So if I carried on eating junk food and sweet food, there might be an unintended consequence to that later on. And that might not be straight away, because that's what normally happens. We neglect something, and a lot of the time there isn't an immediate effect on it. But what normally happens is it accumulates, and then we have a day of reckoning, whatever that day of reckoning is. And we have to be, and I talk about this, we have to apply common sense here. If I carry on neglecting this, there's a high possibility that this might happen. Yeah, it might not happen, but there's a high probability that it will. And actually, is it time for me to stop neglecting that area in my life? So it's interesting, really, when I talk about neglect. And I think it comes down to really identifying and being honest with ourselves, being totally accountable for the things that we are neglecting, and then taking a small step. So pick a domain, pick an action that will improve it or at least reduce that neglect, and then try to apply it. And that's the key thing. Sometimes we're neglecting so many different things, it becomes too much, and then we end up back where we are. Pick one domain. That might be a relationship, might be your physical well-being, it might be your mental well-being, it might be your career, your personal development. Pick one thing, work out what you're neglecting in that domain, and then try to take one action to try and fix it, and then put it into a plan, and then work forward so you feel like you're progressing and you're not neglecting that domain in your life as much, and then it won't accumulate to these bigger things, these consequences that we might have to face later down the road. So there you go. The law of accumulated neglect can pay a heavy price if we're not aware of it. So now you're aware of it, then maybe it's time to take a small step and change it and stop neglecting that domain of your life. So there you go. There's some thoughts on there, something to think about this week. Like I always say, please, step by step we get ahead. So your step might be now to look at this area where there is some accumulated neglect and that desire to change it so that day of reckoning doesn't happen. Keep working forward, write these things down maybe. Keep promising to yourself that you want to make this little change. You don't want to neglect this domain anymore, and you can keep moving forward. So that's it. Look, have an amazing week. I'll catch up with you all next week. See what's on my mind then. See what other things. I might introduce another law, something to think about. And have a great one. I'll speak to you all soon. Take care for now. Bye.